Victim Service Center is a nonprofit organization that provides free, individualized counseling and other services to survivors of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. Today, we will be talking about surviving the holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, and other holidays will be here before we know it. And while this is a beautiful time to spend with your loved ones, the holidays can be triggering. For many, it is a reminder of loss. Seeing old friends and family can bring up past memories and emotions such as sadness, anger, and fear. Feeling depressed or anxious during the holiday season is not unusual. It's okay if this holiday season is just about getting through it. With me today, I have Lainey Doris. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Yeah, hi Hannah.
Thank you, Lainey. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm actually an intern at the Victim Service Center as an advocacy and crisis counselor intern. So I'm doing my master's in social work at UCF right now, so go Knights. And as an advocate and counselor, part of my duties kind of on the advocacy side is to work with clients who are victims, survivors of trauma or any type of crime on, learning about the criminal justice process. We also do accompaniment to like any kind of court hearings or anything like that. And on the counseling side, again, we work with anybody who's had kind of trauma either recently or, in the past, such as in their childhood, on like developing coping skills, having a safe space to talk and, things like that.
That's amazing. Since we're going to be talking about surviving the holidays,
Sure.
Can you give a brief and general overview of what trauma is?
Yeah, so trauma is any type of event or experience or a collection of events or experiences that really kind of overwhelm your ability to cope and to emotionally regulate, which basically means, you have kind of your baseline state, but anything that stresses you out to the level that you can't get back to that baseline. So trauma can be an event, it can be, like our recent hurricane, with our, fellow Floridians in South Florida, it could be 9/11. We hear a lot about trauma with veterans who are in war zones.
And how does trauma affect the brain?
Yeah, so I'm gonna do a little demonstration, but the trauma can impact your brain and yourself over a period of time. So a lot of exposure to trauma can, affect the way you are physically, emotionally, socially, in a lot of different ways. But say this is your brain, the palm of my hand is kind of your emotions and regulating those emotions, and my fingers are the logical part of your brain, the thinking, the being able to tell what's a threat, what's not. Say you're walking down the street in your neighborhood and you see a shadow and you kind of jump for a second. Your brain communicates, the emotions are like, whoa, what is that? But the logical brain is like, that's the shadow of a tree. So you keep walking and you're fine. But say you're still walking and a giant dog that's like barking and foaming at the mouth jumps out of you and you get scared. This is what your brain does. This is your emotional part of your brain and your thinking part of the brain. This is called flipping your lid, aren't really communicating. And that's when you get that kind of flight, fight, or freeze response. Say you're frozen, you can't move. Most people would be like, why didn't you run? But your brain isn't communicating to telling you to do that. But then say the dog's owner comes, that takes the dog away, everything's fine. You're still like this a little bit. You could be feeling sweaty, your heart rate could be beating. You're kind of in this stressed out state. But then you keep walking and over time your brain goes back to this and you're back into that balance. But say you've had a traumatic experience where it can never come back down. Say you have a lot of experiences where your brain keeps doing this. So over time, it gets more and more difficult to come back down. So that's what kind of affects our ability to think logically, to react, to kind of get back to that baseline state.
That's a great example, Lainey. Thank you. We often hear that survivors of trauma, they have triggers. And that example, when you went with your hand like this, would you say that this is like a trigger?
Yeah, that definitely can happen. Sometimes the experiences themselves, that's the traumatic, experience, but a trigger can be anything that happens afterwards that can remind you of that traumatic event or events. So sometimes people are triggered internally. We hear a lot from our kind of survivors that we work with that they have nightmares or flashbacks. They could have just heightened emotions, that kind of come out of nowhere. Those are all kind of internal triggers. And then people can also be triggered externally. So they could hear maybe a song that was playing when a traumatic event occurred, or they could smell something that they smelled that night, or they could see someone who looked like the person that was maybe the perpetrator. So any of those things, kind of both within someone and around someone, can be a trigger. And after someone's triggered, they could be in this kind of heightened emotional state for a long time. It could be for a few hours, it could be for a few days. And that's what a lot of clients come to us at Victim Service Center to help with, is to help kind of identify those triggers and work how to kind of get the brain down here more quickly.
Why can the holidays be so triggering for survivors?
Yeah, and speaking with a lot of our survivors, there's a lot of different reasons that, the holidays can be triggering. For some people, they might not have family around in the area, or have those relationships with their families that, they go to. I think the holidays are a lot of be with your family and do this, but, for a lot of people, they're perpetrators, or they might have had really bad family situations growing up, so they might not have those relationships anymore. I think sometimes just with the change of the seasons, I think the holidays can kind of, and the less sunlight and things like that, can really affect people. And, people might even have to see their perpetrator at a holiday event. They might be asked questions about what happened to them, or if they haven't told people what happened, people might be like, hey, I noticed something's going on with you. But, they might not want to be able to answer those questions. So it could be for a lot of different reasons.
And what are some common reactions that, based on your own experience or that you've read about, what are common reactions that people have towards survivors during the holidays?
Yeah, there definitely can be a wide array of things, but something we hear a lot from clients is, not just at the holidays, but in general, is gaslighting, which is like a manipulation tactic to make someone feel like they don't know what they're saying, or what they believe is incorrect, what their reality is kind of through language, and just kind of shown that it's, or try to be shown that it's not real. So someone who's gaslighting might be like, oh, you don't feel that way, or oh, that didn't happen, even though that could be happening to someone. So, if someone's with their family, maybe they do share something that happened, and they're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, or that's not how that happened when you were a kid. That can be definitely really triggering, because, the holidays and family are supposed to be this, space for togetherness, but if someone doesn't feel like that they can be, supported and validated, then that would be difficult.
Would you say that gaslighting is the biggest thing that you've seen or that survivors talk about during the holidays?
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things. I think the other biggest thing is just not really having, places to go, or to people that they feel comfortable around. I think another example is, with some of our clients who are in domestic violence situations, and, they might not be able to be with their families, their kids could be split apart, they could be going through something. So definitely gaslighting is one of the main kind of communication things, but there's definitely a handful of others.
And what's one piece of advice that you would suggest to a survivor who has experienced or is experiencing gaslighting during the holidays?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes with, I think we'll talk about it in the next session, but having your really understanding kind of your own kind of story, and being able to identify when that's happening, and knowing when to kind of step away from someone who might be communicating like that to you.
Lainey, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Hannah.
Lainey has given us a great overview and explained more in depth about trauma and triggers, and how this can affect individuals during the holidays. When we come back, we will be joined by Rachel Stachler, who is an advocate and crisis counselor at the Victim Service Center, to further this conversation and elaborate more on boundaries and communication. So don't go away. Welcome back to the VSC Healing Begins Here podcast series. In this next segment, we are joined by Rachel Stachler to talk about how survivors can survive the holidays with boundaries and communication. Rachel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can we start off by talking more about you? Tell us what you do.
Yeah, so I'm on the direct care team at VSC. I'm a victim advocate and crisis counselor, so I do a lot of different things at VSC. I do individual counseling, facilitating support groups, workshops, and then also providing educational and accompaniment services to survivors and survivors of trauma and sexual violence. So that might look like going to court with someone because they might have a date related to their victimization and they just want that person there that they trust. Accompanying individuals to forensic exams after a sexual assault, and then just some basic advocacy. Like if someone needs help getting in contact with their detective, trying to get an update on their case, I can assist with things like that as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Today we're talking about surviving the holidays. And as we know, this time can be triggering for some individuals. And boundaries and communication, they're so important for these survivors. Can you touch more on boundaries and communication and what that entails?
Yeah, so I feel like in mental health, there's a lot of talk about boundaries and not a lot of explanation of how to set them. So boundaries are imaginary lines that we set in our life that kind of set the tone in the rule book for how we expect others to treat us and also how we want ourselves to treat others. So, I mean, a really easy example is a survivor might feel uncomfortable being out after dark. So that boundary might be, if there's an event that's happening after dark, I'm not going. Or if I'm coming to spend time with you, know that I'm going to leave before dark because I want to be home and I want to feel safe and comfortable.
And what boundaries might a survivor need to set before going to a Christmas party or going to any kind of holiday event?
So, I mean, there's 3 different types of boundaries. Boundaries can be physical, social, emotional. So a really common physical boundary is maybe someone who survived trauma is not comfortable being touched yet, or maybe they want to be asked before someone touches them. And maybe they just need a simple, like, can I give you a hug? And they're going to say yes if they're in that space where that's okay. As far as a social boundary, maybe someone doesn't want a certain topic brought up. People tend to want to be in control of sharing their story, and maybe they want to let their loved ones know that it's not appropriate to bring up that story, and that they'll bring it up and talk about it when they're ready. And another boundary might be as far as someone needing an emotional boundary where, hey, if I talk to you, I just want you to listen. I don't want advice right now. I just kind of need some space to talk and to process myself. And if I need advice, I'll ask you.
Communicating boundaries can be a bit difficult. What can a survivor do to prepare before expressing their boundaries?
Yeah, absolutely. To prepare your boundaries, I think the best thing to know is to really put in that work to get to know yourself and what you actually are okay with and what makes you uncomfortable and what you're not okay with. So I would definitely recommend maybe a survivor needs to list out their boundaries on a piece of paper. So before they try to figure out who do I need to enforce this with, how am I going to enforce it, and how am I going to bring this up, they actually just know what those things are for themselves. And also just remembering that it's okay to say no. Maybe your boundary is not clearly defined, but if something feels wrong, you can say no, and that clearly is a boundary that you need to explore within yourself.
Are there specific boundary categories that you would recommend a survivor sit down and think about before going somewhere?
Yeah, so when we talk about the example of a holidays, like I brought up earlier, maybe that's a time that you want to leave, and that can be for a bunch of different reasons, right? Like level of comfort, your social battery, maybe when a certain person shows up, that's your time that you want to exit stage left. Some other boundaries you might want to think of are topics of conversation that you're not going to entertain and don't want to entertain, people you might not want to be around, certain parts of your tradition that you might not want to be a part of, and then just what you actually want to do for that holiday. Because we can get invited to a lot of things and feel a lot of pressure to be in different places. But a lot of the time we say yes to things we don't want to go to, and it's okay to just say no to that.
For survivors who will be around their family members and their friends, how can they communicate with them?
Yeah, so communicating boundaries can be a lot harder with a family member or loved one because people that are more comfortable with us tend to be more comfortable communicating with us aggressively, and family members can tend to be pushy, right? So as far as communication tactics, 2 that I really like are called fogging and broken record. So fogging is a really amazing way to placate someone who's coming at you aggressively. And for example, like I said, that example of someone asking you to stay out later than you're comfortable with. If you were fogging with that person, you would kind of agree with any statement that they're giving you that you agree with, and that's true. But at the same time, you're not arguing back. So it's really hard to continue to be aggressive with someone who's not giving you that same energy back. So essentially, you're de-escalating that person without them realizing it. So if someone's pushing you, it'd be so fun, I really want you to go. Maybe I'd say, Hannah, I understand that you really want me to go. I'm sure it would be fun, but I'm not comfortable. So I'm not getting that argument back to you.
Right.
It's coming into this like wall of fog, but it's not coming back out, and the conversation doesn't escalate. Another communication technique is the broken record technique. So the way that works is essentially you make yourself a broken record. My boundary is that I'm not coming to that after party at 10 p.m. because I don't want to be out at that time. So you're arguing with me, you're giving me all the reasons I should go, you're trying to guilt trip me or gaslight me and make me feel like I really need to break my boundary to make you happy. I'm just repeating my boundary back to you over and over again without raising my voice, without getting aggressive. I understand I'm not comfortable going. I understand I'm not going to go. I understand. I hope you have fun, but I'm not going to join you. And then the goal is that eventually that person will realize that your boundary is firm and you're not going to budge. And then, if a compromise is brought up, I would just suggest like only agreeing to a compromise if it's something you're actually really okay with.
And for survivors who feel nervous, anxious, stressed out during this time, are there any tips and suggestions that you can give them?
Yeah, so just a couple. One is I would suggest just keeping your regular routine. We think everyone like feels a lot of pressure to have this like Hallmark movie, amazing Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate, and we expect things to look a certain way. And I would just like remind everyone that, life is not always a Hallmark movie. Keep your expectations realistic. Set those expectations realistically for yourself. Keep your routine regular. Do what makes you feel comfortable. And I would also say things like plan breaks if you're the kind of person that needs breaks from social events. Say no to things that you really don't want to go to. And then what I always suggest to my clients is have someone on call. And what I mean by that is maybe you have a best friend that you really, really trust. Maybe you can't be together on the holiday, but just kind of let that person know, hey, I might have a really hard time tomorrow. Can you please pick up if you see my name on your phone? And then, of course, there's always resources like our 24/7 hotline or other support lines or warm lines if maybe that on-call person isn't available.
Thank you, Rachel. And what is one piece of advice that you would give to a survivor who is preparing and getting ready to go to a holiday party or going out? What is one thing that you would tell them?
I feel like I've kind of beaten this down, but it is okay to say no, and it is okay to like really amplify your choice and your voice, because at the end of the day, you deserve to have a day that makes yourself feel comfortable, and you deserve to do what you need to do to feel as safe and comfortable as you possibly can be.
Rachel, thank you so much for being here. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
Rachel has shared some amazing tips explaining how important it is to communicate your needs and your boundaries during this time. If you would like to learn more about the VSC and our free services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. Call our office line at 407-254-9415 or call our crisis line at 407-500-HEAL. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone.